She wasn't supposed to be in that room. At least, not according to the unwritten rules of who gets to sit at the table. The daughter of a black maid, she had grown up watching her mother clean those same offices where now a billion-dollar crisis had brought the company to its knees. No one noticed her when she quietly entered, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the wall of charts and equations no one had been able to decode. She wasn't wearing a suit. She didn't have a badge. But what she carried with her was far more powerful than anyone realized. In a world that often confuses titles with talent and uniforms with worth, her presence in that moment challenged everything the room believed to be true. The executives had gathered from every corner of the country, each one carrying degrees, accolades, and a deep sense of authority. But none of them had the answer. They had data, graphs, and strategies, but what they lacked was the clarity she had. A clarity not bound by corporate jargon or boardroom expectations, just pure, unfiltered logic and an instinct for solutions that couldn't be taught in any Ivy League classroom. As she quietly approached the whiteboard, the room fell silent. Not out of respect, but confusion. Why was she even here? Before anyone could stop her, she picked up a marker and began connecting the dots they had all missed. One line, one pattern, one truth that had eluded every high-ranking executive. Within seconds, the shape of the solution began to emerge. Something so simple, so elegant, it made them question how they had missed it in the first place. Her answer wasn't just right, it was revolutionary. It reframed the problem entirely, stripping away the noise and highlighting what truly mattered. And it didn't come from years of business school or months of board meetings. It came from an unshakable curiosity, a mind trained not in spreadsheets, but in survival, observation, and relentless thinking. She had spent her life absorbing knowledge in the background, dismissed by many, but never defeated by it. That moment revealed a harsh truth. Genius doesn't always wear a name tag. It doesn't always announce itself in meetings or sit at the head of the table. Sometimes it walks the halls unnoticed. Sometimes it watches quietly from the sidelines, waiting for the one chance to show the world what it can do. The girl in the room didn't fit their mold, but her mind outpaced them all. What made the moment more striking was how many of them had looked right past her, time and time again. The assumption that brilliance only resides in certain bodies, from certain families, holding certain positions, had kept them blind. Her presence didn't just solve a crisis, it exposed a system that routinely overlooks talent unless it comes wrapped in familiar packaging. She had always been seen, but never truly noticed. In the quiet corners of the office building, she walked behind her mother, a cleaning cart in front of them, her presence blending into the background like wallpaper. No one ever asked her name. No one ever considered her potential. She was the maid's daughter, polite, quiet, and invisible. But on the day that everything broke down, on the day the company was drowning in a billion-dollar dilemma, she didn't wait to be asked. She stepped forward, not with confidence born from privilege, but with the boldness of someone who knew her worth even if no one else did. When she picked up the marker and approached the board, there was an uncomfortable shift in the air. She didn't belong there, at least not by their standards. The suits in the room exchanged glances, eyebrows raised, silence heavy. But none of that mattered. She saw a path they didn't, a pattern they had overlooked. Her mind was working on a different level, fearless, unfiltered, and completely uninterested in playing by the rules of corporate hierarchy. What she brought to that moment wasn't just intelligence, it was audacity. The kind of audacity that comes from years of being underestimated. Years of being told through silence and body language that she wasn't part of the story. She wasn't breaking a rule, she was breaking a barrier. One built not by law but by perception, reinforced over generations of exclusion. Her very presence at that whiteboard cracked the foundation of everything those executives believed about who gets to be brilliant. She didn't ask for permission, because she understood that permission was rarely granted to people who look like her, come from where she came from, or carry the labels the world had placed on her. She didn't need a title to prove her value. She didn't need a desk in the corner office to know she could solve problems. What she needed, what she claimed in that moment, was space. And once she took it, everything changed. The men and women in the room watched as she connected pieces they hadn't even noticed were missing. The logic was airtight, the insight stunning in its simplicity. But what shook them most wasn't just the brilliance of her solution. It was the realization that they had been standing in the presence of that brilliance all along and failed to recognize it. They were forced to confront how many others they had overlooked, how often they had equated value with visibility, and how deeply that bias had blinded them. She didn't just solve the crisis, she rewrote the rules. In a single act, she redefined what leadership could look like, what genius could sound like, and who deserved to be heard. She walked through a door that wasn't open for her, and in doing so, she widened it for everyone who would come after her. She didn't just challenge the system, she became the proof that it needed to change. No one in the room expected her voice to matter. After all, the people around the table were carefully selected executives, analysts, consultants with long resumes and expensive suits. Each of them had spent years in boardrooms just like this one, trained to think in formulas and frameworks. The problem before them was urgent, complicated, and expensive. And yet, after hours of debate, every solution fell short. Tension thickened the air as the weight of failure crept closer. That's when she spoke. Her voice didn't match the authority they were used to. It was quiet, thoughtful, uncertain only in tone, not in content. At first, no one turned toward her. But then, she laid out an idea, one so precise, so elegant, it cut through the noise like a blade. It wasn't rooted in business jargon or technical strategy. It came from a perspective no one else in the room had. One shaped by watching, listening, and surviving in spaces where her voice was rarely invited, but her mind never stopped working. They had all approached the problem from the same angle, because they had all lived the same kind of lives. Educated in the same schools, hired through the same networks, trained to think alike. But she wasn't like them. She didn't look at the world through the lens of tradition. Her thinking came from real life, from observation, from a constant awareness that the smallest details matter. She noticed what they missed, not because she was trying to be different, but because her life had taught her to see differently. Her approach wasn't just refreshing, it was disruptive. It challenged everything they thought they knew about how problems get solved. Where they saw limits, she saw options. Where they followed process, she trusted intuition backed by raw intelligence. And because she didn't carry the weight of reputation or corporate expectation, she was free to think without boundaries. That freedom became her greatest advantage. The executives in the room had never considered that a solution might come from someone without a title. They hadn't imagined that the clearest insight could come from outside the usual circles of influence. Her presence wasn't part of their plan, but her perspective changed everything. It reminded them that expertise is not always aligned with authority, and that innovation often lives in the minds of those who aren't taught to follow convention. What they witnessed wasn't just a solution, it was a revelation. They saw how limited their thinking had become, how closed off they were to ideas that didn't come with credentials. Her contribution forced them to reconsider the very structure of how decisions are made and whose voices are valued. The room, once filled with certainty and protocol, had been reshaped by one unexpected point of view. Not because it was louder or more aggressive, but because it came from a place they had ignored for far too long. He had built his reputation on control. Every meeting, every deal, every decision filtered through his leadership. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, he was used to being the smartest person in the room, or at least treated like he was. He didn't just lead, he commanded. People listened when he spoke and stayed quiet when he didn't. That was the rhythm of power he had grown comfortable with. So when the company faced its most catastrophic problem, an unexpected system failure threatening to cost billions and sink investor confidence, he brought in the best consultants, the best engineers, the best data teams. Yet, none of them had the answer. Days passed, and so did solutions. None stuck. The pressure was mounting. Board members wanted results, media outlets were circling, and the CEO's grip on certainty was slipping. Then, in a moment no one could have scripted, a quiet voice came from the back of the room. It belonged to someone no one recognized, not on the payroll, not part of the task force. A teenage girl, standing slightly behind the doorway, eyes fixed on the projection screen where the failed systems were being displayed. She had come with her mother, the building's night janitor, and lingered out of curiosity. What she saw on the screen had triggered a series of connections in her mind, connections none of the experts had made. She stepped forward, hesitantly, and offered a suggestion. Not a guess, not a question. A full, clear breakdown of what the root issue was and how it could be fixed. The room froze. All eyes turned to the CEO, waiting for him to dismiss her or laugh it off. Instead, he stood silent, studying her face, then her words, then the screen again. For the first time in his career, he found himself standing at the edge of his own ego. Here was someone with no credentials, no experience, and no status, yet her logic was undeniable. The numbers checked out. The pattern made sense. Everything clicked. This was the moment that defined his leadership, not all the years of titles and accolades, but this single decision, what he would do next. He could have ignored her, stayed loyal to the chain of command, protected the hierarchy that had always served him. Or he could listen, truly listen. And he did. He ordered the tech team to implement her fix. Within hours, the failing system was back online. The projected losses reversed. The boardroom erupted in disbelief. The news would soon follow. But what shocked everyone wasn't just that she was right. It was that he had listened. That the CEO, known for his rigidity, had recognized something that leadership too often overlooks, that real leadership isn't about always being right. It's about knowing when to step aside, when to elevate others, even when those others don't fit the expected mold. His choice to honor her insight, not suppress it, wasn't just a professional move. It was a deeply human one. It broke the cycle of authority worship and proved that courage in leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet decision to say, someone else sees more clearly than I do. His reaction set off a chain response. People in the room began to ask questions they had never dared ask before. Who else have we overlooked? What other voices are waiting to be heard? What if leadership isn't just about vision, but about humility? His single act of openness, in a moment where the world was watching, rewrote the rules of what it means to lead. Not from above, but alongside. Not with control, but with trust. She hadn't planned on being part of history that day. She had only come along because her mother didn't want to leave her alone at home. It was supposed to be just another long evening at the office, the kind where lights stayed on and people in suits paced back and forth, trying to fix something big and expensive. She sat quietly in the back, a notebook in her lap, pretending not to listen. But she was listening. She had always listened, on buses, in waiting rooms, in the break room where her mother ate lunch alone. She listened, she watched, and she learned. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she knew instinctively that knowledge was a kind of power, especially for someone like her who wasn't supposed to have any. The executives in the room were dealing with numbers that had too many zeros to feel real. A billion-dollar failure loomed over them, and the best minds in the company were spiraling in panic. Deadlines were missed, tempers were rising, and confidence was slipping away. They had looked at the problem from every angle, every expected angle. But no solution seemed to hold. That's when she stood up. No one noticed her at first. She was just the janitor's daughter. She didn't have the look of someone who belonged in the room. But her hand trembled slightly as she pointed at the graph on the screen and softly said, "I think I see the pattern." It took a few seconds before anyone turned around. When they did, their faces reflected a mix of confusion and disbelief. She shouldn't have been there, and she definitely shouldn't have been speaking. But she spoke anyway. She explained the error no one had spotted. She connected dots no one had thought to connect. Her words weren't rehearsed, but they were precise. Her understanding wasn't theoretical. It was clear and real and shockingly sharp. The air in the room changed. The CEO leaned in. The analysts looked at each other, then back at her. No one was speaking now, just listening. She hadn't gone to business school. She hadn't interned with prestigious firms. She hadn't followed the scripted path to success. But what she had done was prepare. Quietly. Constantly. Every book she borrowed. Every video she studied late at night. Every moment she spent absorbing the world around her had prepared her for this moment. And when it came, she didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for permission. She was ready. Her solution wasn't just clever, it worked. It saved the company. And in that instant, everything shifted. People talk a lot about being ready for opportunity, but they rarely talk about how lonely that preparation can be. How much discipline it takes to keep learning when no one expects anything from you. How much inner strength it takes to believe your moment will come, even when the world doesn't seem to see you at all. She had no guarantees. She had no mentors opening doors or systems built to catch her if she failed. But she had something stronger than opportunity. She had readiness. And that readiness collided with a moment so rare, so critical, that the impact was unforgettable. When others crumbled under pressure, she stepped forward, not because the moment made her special, but because she had made herself ready long before the moment arrived. In that boardroom, they saw the result, but what they didn't see was everything that came before it. The hours of studying while her mother cleaned offices, the notebooks full of equations no one asked her to solve, the dreams she kept hidden because speaking them out loud felt too dangerous. Every second of silent preparation had led to this single moment. The room had always looked the same. A long table, sleek chairs, high ceilings, and walls lined with accolades and photographs of past executives, each one a reminder of who was considered worthy of being remembered. And every face in those frames looked the same. For years, the room had operated on unspoken rules about who belonged there, who got to speak, who got to decide. It was never written anywhere, but everyone knew it. Leadership looked a certain way. Intelligence had a certain accent. Innovation came with a certain pedigree. And anyone who didn't match the pattern was made to feel like an outsider long before they were ever given a chance to step in. That day, something changed. The people in the room were scrambling, trying to solve a billion-dollar issue that had no clear path forward. It was the kind of crisis that stripped away ego and exposed real competence. No one had answers. The usual methods had failed. The usual thinkers were stuck. And then, from a place no one expected, came clarity. A girl, young, quiet, unnoticed until that moment, offered a solution. She wasn't on the team. She wasn't even on the payroll. She was the daughter of the woman who cleaned the building after hours. And yet, she saw what no one else could. She had never been in that room before. Not like this. But she had imagined herself in spaces like it 100 times. While waiting in the hallway for her mother. While reading books in the break room. While watching business tutorials on borrowed laptops. She had been preparing herself for a seat at that table long before anyone knew her name. And when she stepped up and delivered the answer, she didn't just solve a technical issue, she disrupted the story that room had always told about who gets to be brilliant. The people around the table were forced to look at her. Really look. Not with pity or surprise, but with respect. And in doing so, they began to see something more uncomfortable. How many others like her had been kept out? How many voices had gone unheard not because they lacked talent, but because the door had never been opened? The boardroom was never just a room. It was a symbol of access, of credibility, of power. And now it had been reshaped by someone who was never supposed to enter it. The idea that innovation can come from anywhere is easy to repeat in speeches and mission statements. But it becomes real when someone with no credentials, no invitation, and no privilege stands up and outperforms everyone in the room. It forces a reckoning, not just with the systems that exclude, but with the assumptions that keep them intact. For so long, the gatekeepers believed they were protecting standards. What they were actually protecting was familiarity, comfort, control. Her presence made them question all of it. She didn't ask for the room to be redefined. She just showed what happens when brilliance refuses to wait for permission. In doing so, she cracked open a space that had been sealed for generations. Others watching from the sidelines saw it too. Not just that it was possible, but that it had already happened. She became proof that the room can look different, sound different, think differently, that the stories written on the walls aren't finished, that the faces in the frames don't tell the whole story. She was a new kind of author, writing a new kind of future with every word she spoke.